Hello, Econ students. Today we're going to be doing Notes 1.2, the Cost of Production and the Production Possibilities Curve, the PPC. Your essential question: how did the cost of production affect the frontier? So, in our first set of notes, we learned about what economics is. Okay, it's the study of making choices. Everybody is doing this on an individual scale, and nations also have to do this on a macro scale. So, in the United States, we make decisions that we call guns or butter decisions. So, these are decisions for our nation to decide how we want to spend all of that tax money that we're collecting from American citizens. So, do we want to spend it on guns, like defense programs, our military, or do we want to spend it on social programs, programs that could benefit citizens in the United States? Overall, we have generally decided to spend more money on the military than on social programs, so more money on the guns than the butter. As you can see here, we have things like the Iraq War that cost about $3 trillion. We decided that it was going to be more important for our nation to spend that that money on the war rather than on programs that could benefit socially in the United States. So, individual companies also have to make these decisions as well. So, producers have to decide how much they are going to produce and at what cost they're going to produce these things at. And then consumers are the people who are buying the goods. So, when our producers make these decisions about labor and output, one of the most basic questions they have to ask is how many workers they should hire. So, to answer this question, owners have to consider how the number of workers will affect their total production. So, for example, if we're looking at a factory, if we're making Jordans, one worker at a Nike factory can produce maybe 4 pairs of Jordans per hour. Two workers could produce 10 pairs of Jordans per hour, and three workers could produce 17 Jordans per hour. After a certain amount of employees are hired, though, the production peaks will begin to drop. You can only have so many people working on so many machines before you run out of time and things become inefficient. We call this the marginal product of labor. The marginal product of labor is the change in output from hiring one more additional unit of labor. It is called the marginal product because it measures the change in the output at the margin. So that's where one worker has been hired or fired. So at the margin, as in adding one more worker, what the change in the output is. As we can see here in this chart, the first three workers that we're hiring, we're having an increase in our marginal product of labor. So we're hiring more people and we're able to produce more things. People are able to specialize their skills. So if you think about it like a factory line and we have one worker instead of one worker creating the entire shoe. So if we had one person working individually to make some Jordans, they would not only have to work on the rubber of the shoe, they'd have to work on the sewing, on the laces, putting everything together. But if we increase the amount of workers that we had, we could allow them to specialize. One person could focus on the rubber sole, one person could focus on the sewing of the material, one person could focus on the laces. That way, they could be more skilled in the job that they were doing and they could be more efficient. So, this is called specialization. So, once we increase the amount of workers that we have, they can become specialized in the specific job they do. Or if you want to think about it in terms of your high school right now, you have probably four different classes right now that you go to, and your teachers are specialized in their specific skill. So they are more productive teaching you the subject that they have learned how to do correctly and properly because they're specialized in that subject. This increases the marginal returns. Now, after we have a certain number of workers hired, we actually end up having diminishing marginal returns. Okay. So, this happens because after hiring so many workers, the benefit of specialization ends. So, then adding more workers will increase total output, but at a decreasing rate. There's limited amount of capital for each worker to use. So if you think about our factory, if we're making Nikes, there's only so many machines. There's only so many sewing machines. There's only so much room on the factory floor for the workers. So if you keep hiring more and more people, eventually you're going to have too many people that you're paying and not enough machines for them to be using. So it's no longer going to be productive and you're going to have diminishing marginal returns. Eventually, this can lead to a negative marginal product of labor. At this point, workers are getting in each other's way and they're disrupting the production process, so overall output actually decreases. Most companies will be able to assess how many workers they need, and they will not allow their number of hires to affect the output of production like this. Companies also have to decide what their costs are going to be to determine the prices that they're going to set on their items. So the production costs are fixed costs. Our fixed costs and our adjusted costs. Our fixed costs are costs that do not change no matter how much of the good or service is produced. So, most of the fixed costs involve the facility itself. So, if we're talking about a factory, that would include the rent on the factory every month. Or if you own a restaurant, it would be the rent that you have to pay on that restaurant. That's going to stay the same every single month, unless your rent goes up for the year, but then it would still be the same monthly cost month after month after month. Or if you have a mortgage, if you own the location, that price is going to be the same each month. That is considered to be a fixed cost because it does not change. Variable costs are the costs that rise or fall depending on the quantity that you produce. So, this would include the cost of the raw materials to buy the labor. So, if we're making those shoes, if we're making the Jordans, the fabric, okay, if we're making more shoes, our variable costs are going to go up because we're going to need more fabric to make these shoes. Cost of labor is a variable cost because it can change with the amount of workers that the company has. So we're going into the holidays right now. A lot of stores are going to begin to hire more. They probably have already, but a lot of retail stores usually hire more around the holidays. So their cost of labor actually goes up because they have more workers that they have to pay, but they end up making more money to be able to do this. Electricity and heating bills, they can also be variable costs. If stores are open for longer hours, their electricity bills are obviously going to go up. And then, depending on the cold, if it gets colder, they need to turn up that heat, then those costs would go up as well. So if we know the total cost at several different levels of output, we can determine the marginal cost at each level. The marginal cost is the cost of producing one more unit of a good. The law of increasing costs is when production increases, so do costs. Okay, so that kind of makes sense, right? If we're producing more things in a factory, if we have more people working, production is going to increase, but our costs are also going to increase. Hopefully, our profits are also increasing. So this sort of maps everything out for you in one big chart here. The total cost of producing something is the fixed cost plus the variable costs. So the production possibilities curve we talked a little bit about in our notes yesterday. The production possibilities curve, or you maybe see me summarize it as just PPC. The PPC is that graph that shows how we can use an economy's resources. So it shows our trade-offs for producing one good over another. It's an axis, so you all have seen graphs like this before. You all have graphed them in your math class many times. So this can display how a factory decides to produce something. It can also show an economy like the United States. It can show guns or butter decisions. Really, you can use it for any two things you want to compare. I throw in various examples all the time, but you can use it for anything you want to compare for an economy. So, first, an economist must decide which two goods or services they are going to examine. So, in this one, I'm going to use the country of Canada, and they're deciding whether they're going to produce shoes or whether they're going to produce pizza. If Canada decides to put all their resources into making shoes, then they wouldn't produce any pizza. Or if they decided they're going to make all pizza, they wouldn't be making any shoes. So if we have all these numbers, all we would do is simply graph it. So if we're looking at pizzas, we can produce 15 pizzas and we can produce 0 shoes for Canada. We're going to have our first dot up here on the PPC. And then if we decide we're going to produce a little bit of shoes, but still majority pizzas, we're going to have a curve go down this way with all of our points plotted from this chart here on the curve. The production possibilities frontier is the line. When you connect all of these dots, that line is considered the frontier. That's the curve on the PPC. So the frontier shows us the line of the production possibilities graph of all the maximum possible outputs. So this is when an economy is being fully efficient. Each point on the PPF also reflects a trade off. Remember, those trade offs are decisions that we're making every day, what we're giving up. So each point on the PPC reflects something that's being given up. So if we're looking at our first point here, we're producing 15 pizzas, but we're not producing any shoes. Our shoes would be our trade off. We're producing pizzas, but we're not producing any shoes. So that would be the trade off. Because of the factors of production, land, labor, and capital are scarce, that's why we can't just produce as much as we want of anything we wanted. Okay, so we've got to remember scarcity, we have limited resources in the world. And that's the end of your notes for today. So don't forget to write a summary, a couple sentences about what you learned.